I want to start with just one thing before we get into the physiological aspects of this. I have experienced the same thing in both mountain biking and cross. And what the real issue for me is handling and brakes. I think you can lose a whole 1 watt per kilogram of like power just based on braking too much, not slowing down too much on the turns, because then you have to accelerate so much more.
It's a ton more work.
You have to put out so many more watts. So I would, unless you know that you are like you're not touching your brakes and you're just gliding through there and all the corners, you're not losing time in all of those, I would look at that first. But Chad, you want to take it away?
Well, I was just going to say, first off, rule out that it's not a fitness disparity. I mean, make sure you're actually as fast as these guys. You say you are on the road, so make sure you are, because if they're taking off and they can do this for a lap or two without falling apart, and it's making you fall apart, either what Nate just described, or maybe you're simply not as fit as they are.
Yeah, that's something like on the road side. I see a lot of roadies come in, and so much strategy is involved on the road, right?
Yeah.
And you learn
and
how
you
to
can
race
hide on the road.
efficiently.
Yeah, totally.
And so like what happens is in cross, a lot of the time what I find is that your skills can mask a whole lot of the lack of fitness that you may have. But I think it's harder to kind of mask that that lack of fitness with cyclocross, because there's not as much benefit to drafting.
There's nowhere to hide.
There's nowhere to hide. You have to end up going way over your limit so many times, so your limits are really exposed. So even though you may destroy them on the road, that doesn't actually mean, and even though they may look like a Fred and you think you look super cool or something, they may be faster than you. Yeah. And that's just kind of, it's a tough pill to swallow, but that's a possibility. Yep.
And maybe if you don't have snap or a punch, or you can't sprint very well, certainly work on that, but it doesn't mean you have to convert yourself from one type of rider to a sprinter, because I'm here to tell you, none of these sports are sprinter sports. I mean, they're all endurance sports. So utilizing a sprint, having access to it, and cultivating one is absolutely, or not absolutely, but often enough beneficial. But it doesn't mean you have to focus all your training on becoming a better sprinter now. I mean, everything I always think about, I think it's the 2000 Olympics in Sydney. The German pursuit team set a world record that year. They did it on an amazing amount of low intensity, high volume. They didn't do any intensity until their 8-day taper prior to the event. And they went out and set a world record.
The German, what was it?
German pursuit squad. So that's a 4K effort. So we're talking,
could they help me on
4-ish minutes.
Yeah,
probably.
You guys, Nate at TrainerRoad.com. Come out to Reno.
But the point is, they're aerobically inclined. I mean, even for something like a 4-minute effort on a track, they're still very much aerobic athletes.
Yeah, you exhaust those anaerobic stores pretty quick with those efforts.
Yeah, and you can only use them so much and within frequency, and you have to use them selectively and whatnot. So while, again, I'll say that it's necessary to have that component, that tool in your toolbox, but that's not what the sport is. It's an endurance sport. So don't change things too drastically.
The way there's so many ways to describe it, but it's like your aerobic is like your foundation, and then you kind of hone the knife a little bit with the anaerobic work at the end. But that's not like that's 50% or 80%.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to underplay the importance of having a good anaerobic engine. That's absolutely necessary, but it doesn't mean you shift your training to become a sprinter.
You want to see people that are less fit than you. They're the people you pass on that 2, 3, 4, 5. Right? Like they may start hard. Like at Reno Cross, for example, in the industry race, I had a sweet hole shot and I led for a lap. And then I just went like explosion, right? And my lack of fitness was exposed by the event that is cyclocross.
But even if you had a high level of fitness, maybe that's not the best way for you to race that course. And we were talking about Jeff Kabush is a really good example of someone who doesn't necessarily race like this, but races really well because he knows what his strengths are and he rides accordingly.
Yeah, and how he races it. And this is actually similar to what we saw from Keegan Swenson too, who is a very different rider in terms of like size. Keegan's very small, 140 pounds. Kabush is bigger for a cross-country mountain biker and cyclocross racer. He's probably around 175 maybe, I would think, somewhere around 170. So I may be wrong. I apologize, Jeff. But the point is both of them pace it way more evenly than we think. Like way more. Remember, I mean, Cross Vegas is one where you're basically riding through Velcro the whole time with the grass. But Keegan's normalized power and average power were extremely close.
Yeah, so I watched that race, and Keegan was with the front group the whole time, and you were pretty much the same weight. You guys have similar handling abilities.
Yep.
He's a little better than you, but
yeah, he's better than me.
But it's not like me and him where the brakes. But if we looked at your power versus his power, your difference between NP and AP, which is like how variable you are, you had a big difference. he was within like 10 watts, which
Super
means
close.
Ridiculous.
he did not surge as much out of the corners. He was very a lot smoother.
Yep.
And Chad, doesn't that take a less physiological toll?
Far lesser toll. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just does. It's that simple.
And he was still in the lead pack,
Yep.
right? So
How often were they getting off their bikes on a course like that? I don't remember. It didn't seem like there were too many
I don't think
dismounts.
there was any.
And that's going to
I
have
don't think they may have gotten off
that will
once.
have some bearing on normalized versus average.
sure.
But we were in the same race.
Yeah.
We did the same course.
Yeah, absolutely.
And right. So I think with us two, we're not as good at handlers as they are. So you could say, well, that's because, especially me, Nate hit his brakes. That's why he'd accelerate more. But with Jonathan, I would say that's not the case.
Right.
He just is smarter than you.
Yeah, and he keeps the power down when I let off and ease up, and I want to relax. He just keeps it consistent, but then that allows him to carry more momentum through things, so he has to accelerate less, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard because you'll go into turns right now and you'll think there's no way I could go faster through this turn, but as your skills expand, you're able to do that, and it's kind of this this difficult thing because as you become more technically, I guess, skilled, you actually don't have to race as hard, meaning that the punches don't have to be as hard.
Producer Nick, I put it in Slack. There was like the first couple laps of a UCI Pro race of GoPro footage.
Yeah.
It is the most intense cycling footage I've ever seen. Could you take that out and put it in the show notes? Because that shows you where you think like, oh, they're starting so hard, but they're just, it looks hard the whole time, but it is constant power. It's interesting to watch to see the intensity. And I mean, they're not going, obviously they can't go for 10 minutes 120% of threshold. No one can do that.
Right.
So they're at threshold, but it's just amazing to see how intense and strong that race is compared to when I race cross. It's not like that. It's not like that at all.
Yeah. My GoPro videos are never as interesting as that. That's
But
for
yeah,
sure.
that reminds me or brings up a point too that you have to consider the different dynamics of a road ride, even if it's kind of a surgy road ride versus a cross race. The cross race, okay, I don't know too many road rides that are an hour or less, but cross races are all an hour or less. So you can ride them very differently. I mean, you can exploit those anaerobic stores. I mean, just piss them away because you don't need to have them for that long.
Yep.
But on a road ride, it's very different. So again, this is a matter of playing your strengths, but also addressing chinks in the armor.